The glass did not shatter dramatically. It simply slipped from the edge of the side table, caught a small current of air from the heating vent, and landed on the hardwood floor of the Ashford Crane family's living room with a sound that was somehow both ordinary and final. No one moved to clean it up. The piece of stemware had cost $400, and no one moved. Nia Asante noticed this, the way she noticed most things, quietly, from the outside, cataloging details the way she had learned to catalog them as a child. When noticing things was sometimes the difference between being prepared and being caught off guard. She had been caught off guard enough times in her childhood that the habit had become reflex. She watched the broken glass, and she watched the people who did not move, and she filed both observations away. She had been married to Callum Ashford Crane for 7 years. In that time, she had learned that the Ashford Crane family did not clean up their own messes. They employed people for that. She had met Callum at a tech conference in Vancouver, in the kind of setting that feels cinematic in retrospect and exhausting in the moment. Fluorescent lights, a panel discussion running 20 minutes over, lukewarm coffee in paper cups with the conference logo. She had been presenting her company's infrastructure software to a room of investors. He had been in the third row. After the panel, he had found her near the coffee station and told her he had questions about her Q3 projections. And she had known he was not actually interested in her Q3 projections. But she had answered them anyway, precisely and thoroughly, because she always did. They dated for 2 years before he proposed. In those 2 years, his family made their feelings through methods that could never be directly quoted or specifically cited. Small things, adjustments, the kind of friction that, if you described it to someone who hadn't felt it, sounded like nothing. His mother, Lorraine, had a habit of pausing just slightly too long before she smiled at Nia. Not long enough to be rude, long enough to be noticed. His father, Gerald, called her by her name approximately 60% of the time, and used dear or sweetheart the other 40%, which in different circumstances might have been warmth, but in practice felt like a signal that her name was not fully lodged in his memory as something worth retaining. His sister, Tatum, once asked Nia at a family dinner in the 2nd month of their relationship whether Nia had always been in technology or whether that was something she'd gotten into recently. Nia had said she had founded her company at 26. Tatum had said, "Oh, that's fun," in a tone that indicated she had not processed the content of the sentence, only its general category. And Callum, who was good at many things, who was genuinely charming and occasionally perceptive, and loved her in the way that some people love, completely within the walls of their private life, not quite as reliably in the spaces where his family could see. Callum watched these things happen, and sometimes laughed, and sometimes changed the subject, and sometimes touched her hand under the table in a way that was meant to communicate solidarity but communicated more clearly that he had chosen to let it pass. She let it pass too. She told herself it was patience. Later, she would understand it had been something else. The old reflex of making herself smaller, to fit inside a space that hadn't been built for her. She had done it her whole life. She knew the dimensions well. Nia had grown up in Scarborough, in a house that was too small for the number of people in it and too cold in the winter because her mother kept the heat at 62 to manage the electricity bill. Her mother worked 2 jobs. Her father had been present, and then less present, and then not present at all, which Nia had processed first as confusion, then as a kind of neutral fact, the way weather is a fact. It simply was. She had been good at school, with the specific intensity of someone who understood that being good at school was not an end but a mechanism. She had studied computer science at the University of Toronto, on a combination of scholarships and part-time work, and she had eaten a lot of rice and chickpeas in her 3rd year, and she had graduated with distinction, and none of it had been easy, and she had not expected it to be easy, and this distinction between expectation and reality was one of the things that had made her very good at building things. She founded Lattice Core when she was 26, in a sublet apartment in Kensington Market, using a laptop that had a crack across the lower right corner of the screen. The company was an enterprise software platform for supply chain logistics. It was not glamorous. It was extremely useful. By the time she was 34, Latticecore was operating in 11 countries and had been valued at $1.4 billion at its Series D funding round. She had not been photographed on the cover of a magazine yet when she met Callum. That came later. When they met, she was successful in the specific way that people who build infrastructure software are successful. Known within her industry, unknown outside it, comfortable with the gap. She was not performing success. She simply had it. This was, she sometimes thought, part of why the Ashford Cranes could overlook it so efficiently. Success that announces itself is hard to dismiss. Success that simply sits there, doing nothing to call attention to itself, can be categorized any number of ways by people who need to categorize it. The Ashford Cranes had categorized her. She knew. She had always known. She married Callum anyway, because she loved him, and because she believed, as people in love often believe, that love was a sufficient foundation for the other things to shift over time. She had been 34 when she got married. By the time of the Ashford Crane summer gathering in Muskoka, she was 41. The other things had not shifted. The summer gathering was held at the family's property on Lake Rousseau, a property that had been in the Ashford Crane family for 3 generations, and that functioned, Nia had long since concluded, less as a place of rest than as a stage set for the family's idea of itself. There were canoes that no one took out on the water. There was a dock with cushioned loungers and a windsock. There was a guest cabin where the overflow relatives stayed, and there was a main house that was 14,000 square feet and smelled permanently of cedar and someone's expensive candles. This year the gathering was larger than usual. Callum's cousin was getting engaged to a woman from Oakville, and the families were being introduced, and the whole occasion had been inflated by Lorraine into something that required catering and a string quartet and name cards in italic calligraphy. Nia had driven up with Callum on the Friday evening. She had brought a bottle of wine from a producer in the Niagara region and a hostess gift for Lorraine, a set of hand-thrown ceramic serving dishes she had driven out of her way to pick up from a studio in Leslieville. Lorraine had received the dishes with the particular warmth she reserved for Nia's gestures, genuine enough to be undeniable, restrained enough to communicate that the gesture had been noted but not absorbed. On Saturday morning, Nia sat at the long table on the covered porch while the family assembled around her in stages. She had coffee. She had brought a book. She was reading, or trying to read, in the way that you try to read when you are in a space that hums with undercurrents you cannot fully ignore. Callum's uncle, a man named Prescott, who worked in private equity and owned a sailboat he mentioned at intervals throughout any gathering, sat down across from her. He was a large man with a confident way of filling space, and he looked at her book and said, "What do you read for?" Nia looked at him. "What do you mean?" "Work or pleasure?" "Pleasure," she said, because the book was a novel. Prescott nodded, as if she had confirmed something. "Callum says you work in software," he said. "I founded a software company," Nia said. "Latticecore. We do supply chain infrastructure." "Right," Prescott said. He poured himself coffee. "My son-in-law is in that space. Digital logistics. Different scale, but similar idea." He did not ask her to say more about Latticecore. She did not offer more. The conversation moved to his son-in-law's company for the next 6 minutes, and Nia finished her coffee and went inside. The afternoon brought activities the family had organized with the precision of people who feared unstructured time. There was a kayaking rotation, and a cornhole tournament, and a lunch that stretched from noon to 3. Nia participated in the ways she always participated. Enough to be present, not enough to be performing presence. She sat between Callum and his cousin at lunch and listened to the conversation around her. She spoke when spoken to. She was not sullen or quiet in a pointed way. She was simply there, in the exact quantity she had always been there, and the exact quantity had always been slightly less than what the room wanted from her. without quite being able to articulate what it wanted. At 3 o'clock, while people were moving between the dock and the lawn, Tatum found Nia on the side porch and sat down beside her. Tatum was 45, 3 years older than Callum, and she had the kind of blonde hair that gets progressively highlighted as it grays so that the transition is invisible. She had married a man named Fletcher who worked in commercial real estate, and they lived in Forest Hill, and she was not a bad person. She was not a person who thought of herself as doing anything wrong, which was, Nia had long understood, a category of person worth watching carefully. "You're quiet today," Tatum said. "I'm fine," Nia said. "You always seem a little out of your element up here." Tatum said this with genuine kindness in her voice, which was what made it so efficient. "It's a lot, when it's this many people." Nia looked at the lake. "It's not the people," she said. Tatum waited, assuming Nia would explain. Nia did not explain. After a moment, Tatum said, "We just want you to feel at home." And Nia said, "I know," and both of them understood that the conversation had arrived somewhere neither of them was going to name. That evening, the caterers set up a long table on the back lawn. There were lanterns and white linen and the string quartet playing something in the middle distance. 61 family members and guests arranged themselves in the early evening light, and it was beautiful, genuinely beautiful, and Nia sat at her assigned seat and felt the beauty of it and the exclusion of it simultaneously, as she had learned to feel most things in this family's orbit, doubled, one layer over the other. Callum had too much to drink. She knew this by the way he laughed, a half second, too long on each laugh, and too readily. She knew it by the way he touched her shoulder across the conversation, more frequently than usual, which was not affection so much as anchoring. He was looking for something to hold on to, which meant the alcohol was doing what it did. And he knew it, and was reaching for her to steady him. This was what she understood later. When she turned it over, she knew he was drunk, and she had not anticipated what drunk meant for him in this context. In this family, in this setting, with this much accumulated pressure and this many people watching. His father made a toast. It was the kind of toast that Gerald Ashford Crane made routinely, self-congratulatory without appearing to be, nostalgic in a way that centered the family as a continuous and admirable institution, warm toward the new couple being introduced. Nia watched Callum listen to it. She watched something work through him, something she didn't have a name for in the moment, though she would find one later. After the toast, the table broke into smaller conversations. Callum's cousin was showing photos of his engagement trip. Prescott was holding court at the far end of the table. Lorraine was moving between guests with the focused energy of a woman who needed the evening to go well. Callum leaned toward Nia and said something she didn't catch. "What?" she said. He said it again. His voice was low and the quartet was playing, and she still didn't catch all of it. Only certain words. "You never." And "this family," and "fitting in." And then he sat back slightly and said, more clearly, "You make this hard, you know that?" She looked at him. "You make everything into a project," he said. "A thing to analyze. You can't just be here," she said. "Callum, I'm serious." He was not loud. He was not making a scene. Not technically. "You've been gone all day, sitting alone on the porch. Not trying." "I was trying," she said quietly. "Were you?" He said it with the particular precision that only emerges from a specific combination of alcohol and accumulated resentment. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you don't want to be here. Like you never wanted to be part of this family," she said very quietly. "Please, don't do this here." And then several things happened very quickly, though in her memory they would always happen slowly, each detail in high resolution. Callum pushed back from the table slightly. His hand came forward. Not a slap, technically, not with force or intent as legal terms define those words, but a sharp, dismissive gesture that caught her across the cheek with the back of his fingers, the way you might wave something away. And the sound of it was not loud, but it carried in the way that sounds carry when the surrounding space goes suddenly, completely still. The quartet continued playing for approximately 4 more seconds. Then they stopped. Nia did not move. She sat with her hand at her cheek and she did not look at anyone. She looked at the white linen tablecloth and the arrangement of small candles in glass holders. And she waited as she had been waiting in one form or another for 7 years, for someone at this table to say something. Gerald set down his glass. Lorraine had turned and was looking. Prescott had stopped mid-sentence. Tatum was looking at her hands. Callum said, "I didn't, that wasn't," and stopped. 61 people at the table, and in the chairs beyond the table, and standing near the bar cart at the edge of the lawn. She was aware of each of them as a unit of silence. Fletcher, Tatum's husband, cleared his throat. He did not speak. The man from Oakville, the one who was about to be engaged into this family, looked at his soon-to-be fiancée. She looked at the tablecloth. No one said anything. For a very long time, in the way that measured time is different from experienced time, no one said anything. And then, into that silence, Lorraine said, "Perhaps we should," and did not finish the sentence. And that unfinished sentence was, in some ways, the most precise thing anyone had said all evening. Nia stood up. She did not say anything. She placed her napkin on the table, on the outside of her plate, and she walked across the back lawn toward the main house, and her heels left small impressions in the soft ground. And she was aware of exactly how quiet it was behind her. She went inside, through the back door, into the kitchen where the catering staff were plating the second course. And she walked through the kitchen and into the hallway and into the front sitting room, the one the family never used because it faced the road rather than the lake. And she sat down in a chair that smelled like cedar and old upholstery. Her phone had been in her jacket pocket the entire evening. She was the kind of person who kept her phone in her pocket at social events because she had not had a personal assistant long enough to feel natural about handing off her communications. There were 4 missed calls. 2 from her COO, 1 from her communications director, 1 from a number she recognized as belonging to the producer of the segment that was supposed to air that evening on CBC. The feature piece that had been in production for 4 months, the one about Canadian tech founders, the one she had agreed to in January when her publicist had said it was time to shift from industry known to publicly known, the one she had given 12 hours of interview time to, the one that was airing tonight at 9. It was 9:14. She did not turn on the television in the front sitting room. She sat in the chair for a few minutes, and then she called her communications director back. She did not know, exactly, what happened on the back lawn while she was in the front sitting room. She learned it in pieces, later, from sources she trusted more than she trusted the family's version of events, what she knew directly. At 9:17, Callum's niece, who was 19, and had brought a wireless speaker to the dock that afternoon, came through the back lawn holding her phone screen up, asking everyone if they'd seen it. She was the one who found the CBC segment first. The segment was 42 minutes long and had been produced by a journalist who had been in the industry for 20 years. It opened with aerial footage of Toronto's financial district, and then cut to Nia in an interview setting, and the chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Nia Asante, founder and CEO, Lattice Core, current valuation, $31 billion. Callum's cousin, the one getting engaged, had pulled it up on his phone while still seated at the dinner table. The screen was bright against the early night, and people leaned in, and then leaned back, and then went very quiet in a different way than they had been quiet before. Prescott said, 3.1, and did not finish. Gerald stood up from his chair and then sat back down. Lorraine was told about it by Tatum, who had walked over to where Lorraine was standing near the string quartet and whispered something, and Lorraine had looked at the main house, at the windows, and had not said anything for a long moment. Fletcher, who had not spoken during the moment that mattered, said something about knowing she was successful. His wife did not look at him. The quartet had not resumed playing. The catering staff, who were moving through the guests with the second course, continued moving through the guests with the second course because they were professionals. Nia was still in the front sitting room when Callum found her. He stood in the doorway. She was sitting in the upholstered chair by the window, her phone in her lap, the room lit only by the lamp on the side table. She had spoken to her communications director and her COO, and she had looked at the messages that had accumulated over the past hour from colleagues and board members, and two journalists who wanted comment on the piece. Callum stood in the doorway and looked at her, and did not appear to know what to say, which was accurate because there was nothing adequate to say, and she had always respected accuracy in people, even when it came at the wrong moment. "Nia," he said. She looked at him. "I need you to understand." "I understand?" she said. "I wasn't. I didn't mean for that to, Callum." She said his name without heat or volume, the way you say a name when you need someone to stop. "I know what happened." He came into the room and sat down in the chair across from her, the matching upholstered chair that faced the road. Outside, through the window, she could see the headlights of a car moving slowly down the property's private road. Probably a guest leaving. "I've been under a lot of pressure," he said. She waited. "This whole family thing, the reunion, and my father's been—" He stopped. Started again. "I know that doesn't make it okay." "It doesn't," she said. "I know." He looked at his hands. "I saw the segment, everyone saw this." She didn't say anything. "I knew you were. I knew Lattice Core was." He stopped. He was trying to locate a sentence that worked. She could see him trying. And the thing was that there was no sentence that worked, so he kept stopping. "I didn't know the valuation was at $3 billion. Why would that change anything?" she said. She wanted to hear him answer the question, because the answer would tell her something she needed to know. He was quiet for a long time. "It doesn't," he said finally. "It doesn't change anything." But it had changed the way he was sitting. It had changed the quality of the silence around him. She could see it in the exact way he held his hands in his lap. She stayed in the front sitting room until the gathering had wound down. She did not go back out to the lawn. She heard voices and movement, and eventually the sound of guests leaving. And at some point Lorraine came to the sitting room doorway and said, "Nia, I hope you know," and then also did not finish a sentence. And Nia said, "Thank you, Lorraine," in a voice that closed the conversation, and Lorraine went away. A woman named Charlotte, Callum's cousin's girlfriend, the one from Oakville who would shortly be his fiancée, knocked softly on the sitting room door at around 11. She was perhaps 32, and she had dark hair, and she had been quiet through most of the evening. She stood in the doorway and said, "I just wanted to say that I'm sorry about what happened. I should have said something. When it happened, I wanted to, and I didn't." Nia looked at her for a moment. "I appreciate you saying that," Nia said. "I'm going to think about why I didn't," Charlotte said. "For a while." She paused. "I watched the segment on my phone in the kitchen. You're extraordinary. I don't mean that as an explanation. I wanted to say it." She left. Nia sat with the word extraordinary and thought about how she had been exactly as extraordinary at 9 o'clock as she had been at 6, and what the 3 hours between those two times had contained. She called her lawyer from the front sitting room at 11:45. She had his personal number. She had used it before, for business, not for this, and the shift in context was noticeable, though he was professional in the way she had chosen him for being professional. She drove back to Toronto the next morning, early, before most of the household was awake. Callum sat in the passenger seat. Neither of them spoke for the first hour of the drive. The highway was quiet, the morning flat and silver gray in the way of Ontario mornings in late August. She had the radio off. She drove the speed limit exactly. "Somewhere around Barrie," Callum said. "Where are we?" She understood he was not asking about geography. "I don't know yet," she said. This was honest. She was not a person who arrived at conclusions before she had enough information to support him, and she did not have enough information yet. Not about what she wanted, not about what she was willing to carry forward and what she wasn't. She had spent 7 years making room for things she should not have made room for, and she understood that clearly now, though understanding something clearly and knowing what to do with the understanding were two different processes that happened on two different timelines. What she knew was this. She had sat at a table with 61 people who had watched something happen and said nothing. She had been in that family for 7 years, and she had watched small things happen over and over, and she had said very little herself. And the segment had aired, and people who hadn't moved had rearranged their faces. And she knew, with the specific clarity that comes from having paid very careful attention for a very long time, that the rearrangement of faces was not the same as a rearrangement of understanding. She also knew this. She had called her lawyer. She had not called him to feel powerful. She had called him because calling him was the next correct action. And she had always, even when it was the only resource she had, taken the next correct action. The segment won a Gemini Award nomination the following spring. She was photographed for the cover of Canadian Business in October, standing in the Lattice Core boardroom in a charcoal suit, looking directly into the camera with an expression that the photographer later described to a colleague as someone who has already solved the problem you haven't told her about yet. The photograph ran at the front of the magazine, full bleed, with the headline, "The Quiet Billion." Her mother, who still lived in Scarborough, in a house that was now fully heated in winter. Because Naya had quietly updated the insulation, and the furnace 2 winters ago, saw the cover at a magazine rack in a Shoppers Drug Mart on Lawrence Avenue. She bought 2 copies. She texted Naya a photo of both copies on the seat beside her in the car. Naya texted back a single heart. She was in a meeting when the text came in, a meeting about Lattice Core's expansion into the Southeast Asian market, with 7 people around a glass-top table in a boardroom on the 34th floor of a building in the financial district. The meeting was important. She responded to her mother between agenda items, on a phone that she kept face up on the table beside her notebook, because she had learned, not recently, but early, in ways that early lessons become structural, that the things that mattered and the things that other people thought were serious were not always the same list, and she had long since stopped apologizing for the difference.